So I'm going to be talking today about extreme theme makeovers. So I think this is going to be extreme enough. Bright yellow, black, extreme, feeling extreme. So as he said, I'm Megan Gray. I'm a designer first. So this talk will be kind of from the perspective of a designer. So if you're a developer, keep that in mind. WordPresser and hopeless beach bum from Southern California. I work with the wonderful Jake at 10up, who did not tell me I looked tired today. I'm thankful for that. I overshare daily on Twitter, personal portfolio, and then, of course, you can find us at 10up.com and see what we're up to. So customizing off-the-shelf themes is one of my favorite things, and I think of it as a win. Not a cheat, not a shortcut, but a win. And this is going to kind of work with Chris Lemma's talk about being efficient and making the most of your time and your budget. So I think it's great when you're just beginning. I started designing for WordPress with a couple of years of web design experience under my belt, but mostly my background is in print design, logo design, and just being like a little artsy-fartsy. So I thought it was a great way for me to learn how themes are put together, how WordPress works, and just to kind of take it apart in a modular way, understand how to make it look awesome and put it back together. So if you're just getting started with WordPress or designing for WordPress, I won't make you raise your hand because I did that when I was first getting started and I felt a little bit like the only person in the room. But if you're getting started, this is a great way to do it. When you're short on time, budget, or resources, every client I've ever worked with is short on time. So everyone needs a site yesterday. And budget, that can be an issue. And for me, resources, again, when I was just starting out, I didn't have access yet to I didn't know a lot of developers. I didn't know developers I could trust to work with. I didn't know developers who were the ones in WordPress. So this is something I did by myself as a designer. And if you're working solo as a designer on a WordPress site, customizing off-the-shelf themes is a great approach. And finally, when you want to work smarter, not harder. Anybody doesn't like to do that? You don't like to? Okay, yeah. You can just keep working harder, Nicole. Yeah, keep doing that. So, I mean, as a designer, I'm a little nitpicky, I'm a little detail-oriented, and I want my sites to look perfect down to the detail. But I'm also in business, right? So I want to maximize my profit. I want to work smart, and on a fixed price budget, I want to get through it efficiently. And that's why I think we have to use both halves of our brain when we're creatives. The creative process is horrible sometimes. It can be really exhausting for a creative. It gets a little chaotic, and you want to protect yourself from that when you're designing a lot of work in a short amount of time over and over and over. But you also want to protect your projects, your timelines, and your budgets from creative chaos. So my creative process over the years of doing this professionally has refined a bit, and I've started to use my left brain a little bit more. So I used to just jump right into the design. I would buy a theme, and I would start just ripping it apart, adding background images, changing hex colors, and it was a mess. And now, the very first thing I design is a plan, because you have to eat your vegetables first. I don't like vegetables, but I'm a vegetarian, but whatever. So I say that just because it's the thing you need to do that first, and then you can move on to what maybe for you as a visual designer is the fun stuff. So have a plan. Otherwise, you're just messing around. So this is at a really high level, but at a minimum, you need to ask yourself when you're developing or designing a site, who is this for? Who is going to be visiting this site? Who's going to be using this site? And who's going to be benefiting from it? What does it have in it? Not just today, but in the future. What kind of content do you have now? What kind of content might you have down the road? You might have nothing now. And then what does it need to look like? And this is the part I kind of focus on the most sometimes. Sometimes a client in the past would come to me with a creative brief. And this is where, kind of like Chris Lemma said, you really need to get out in front of that, especially if this creative brief, which if you don't know, that's just, it can be anything, but it's basically can be a pretty prescriptive document about how you need to do your job and what the site needs to look like and what the design needs to be. And especially if this was not prepared by another creative, you need to get out in front of it and change the conversation to be about what problems the client is having or what goals they have. And then you remind them, I'm the one designing the solution. I'm the one who will, I mean, absolutely I will consider that you hate red or that you do not want any textures. But you need to really consider what it's going to look like and how all of this works together. And then you need help. You've got a plan. And I strongly believe this as somebody who ran my own shop for a few years and worked by myself. And even now that I'm with 10 Up and I have this team of awesome rock stars to work with, you need help and you need to get it early. And you need to get it often, especially when you're just beginning. Because it's better to get it early than late. But the first thing you should do is find a trusted WordPress consultant. And I say trusted because there are a lot of people out there calling themselves WordPress experts. And I do know that most of the WordPress actual experts I know spend a good amount of their time fixing the work that other WordPress experts have done. Yeah. And then share your plan. And you know, maybe depending on where you are in your career or your process, maybe you get help before you come up with a plan. Also a very smart idea. And when you share your plan, be open to the developer's feedback or the WordPress consultant's feedback. Come in with an open mind. Because I can't tell you as a designer how shocked I was to learn that a plugin that had 4 stars in the repo that had 1 million downloads. I'm exaggerating, I do that sometimes, but and then to hear that that plugin did something that, I forget the phrase, but it's injecting unsanitized code into the database. I'm like, what? You don't know what you don't know. And I can tell you that preventing fires is way better than putting them out. And you will have a much easier time recruiting somebody to help you be part of your strategy than you will for being part of your cleanup. I've worked with a lot of disgruntled people who have to go in and clean something up, and they're just sitting at their computer shaking their head like, this guy did what? This guy put this here. And I would just, I love the developers I work with, and I would really like for all of us to throw them a bone and have them be a part of the strategy instead of always putting out the fires. So now, before you jump into the design, you've got your strategy, your plan, and somebody has said, this is okay, this will not break your site, and everything's good. You got to do a warm-up lap, because if you just, a runner doesn't just put on his shoes and sprint. That would be horrible. And I think that's what you're doing when you just open up Photoshop and expect yourself to have a website. Like, from a white square, I'm going to make a website out of this. That's not good. So the first thing I like to do is find my inspiration. And this can be a tedious process. How many of you are designers? So raise your hand if you think inspiration feels wonderful, like a walk in the park. Yeah, one person. The rest of us feel, sometimes, right? Like when you know what to do with that inspiration, it feels good. Otherwise, it feels like, I wish I had created this. This is horrible. I can't do this. Or, it just feels overwhelming, because when you're a creative and you've got all of these, it's like sensory overload. So control this process. Be very methodical. Use your left brain when you're searching for your inspiration. The first thing is go back to your creative brief, whether you created it or your client created it or you collaborated on it. It may have been a couple of days. It may have been a couple of weeks. Go back to it. Clarify your purpose. Remember your goals, and keep them in mind as you look. Don't think about what you think is pretty or what you like or what your favorite designer did that's cool and then force that back into the creative brief. Keep it in mind as you go along. Be smart about that. And sources. So my sources kind of evolve as my creative process does. When I used to look for inspiration for web design, where would I look, right? Websites. I would look at Web Cream or awards, or I would just look how other people were designing websites. I would study every detail. I would see what made them great and what made them unusable and what made how they could even be better. But now I find the inspiration everywhere. I know that to somebody who maybe isn't a creative, that sounds a little obnoxious, but I find the inspiration for typography and magazine layouts. I look around me. I go to stores. It's everywhere. But really what's important is what you do with that inspiration. And you save it. You save it for later. You use a tool like Pinterest or Gimme Bar is a really cool one if you're working on a team and you want to collaborate and use, same with Pinterest, you can ask people to join a board. Create a secret board, by the way, on Pinterest. Take it from me when you're working for clients and you're putting up all your cool ideas. You can only do 3 of those, so don't work on more than 3 projects at a time, which is a good idea anyway. So save it for later, and I think my beliefs on this are that even if you don't do anything immediately or directly with that inspiration, it's resonating with you somehow. It's working its way into your subconscious, and as you continue your search, you'll find that your focus narrows, and you start to clarify where you're going with this. And I believe that you'll know when you're ready to jump on it. And that may be when your client emails you and says, where's my site? So the next step would be shopping for themes. And had I done this presentation for you a year ago, I would have maybe had this the first slide. Wrongfully, stupidly, I would have done this first. I would have, as a very visual person with a strong connection to themes and my love of them, I would have said, shop for themes, find the one you love. But the truth is, that's a horrible idea, because when you find the theme first, you're making compromises on your content and your functionality later. You're shoehorning the client's wishes, needs, and goals into something you like or that has a slider. And really what you need to do is do everything else first and then get to this fun part. So when you figure out what theme you want, that's important, but it's equally important to figure out where your theme comes from. Because where your theme comes from, who made it, who supports it, really defines the character and the quality of that theme, how long they're going to be around, how they're going to support updates, who's going to help you when you don't know how to set it up. Don't expect it to change after you buy it. I volunteer in the Studio Press forums occasionally, and I'll see a lot of people wanting their theme to do something it just does not support. Or they want to remove or unregister a feature that is really integral to this theme. So, I mean, take it for what it is. And if you're, I mean, the whole point of this is efficiency. So find something that's 80, 90, 95% of the way there. That's what you want. And you'll know when you find the one, you'll see something that will just inspire you to what it could be, or it just clicks with you. And again, if your client has experienced this, they found the one, and they come to you and say, I'm looking for a customization of this theme. Ask them a lot of questions. Make sure that this fits them. It's more, again, than just a visual process. So back it up and make sure that this theme is best for them, not that they just think it looks pretty. You may now open Photoshop. You have finally got to that place in your design where you can begin designing. Not the plan, but the actual site. And this is what that looks like. So my hope is that if you follow this kind of process, you either won't have this screen at all, because it's a means to avoid it. You're designing in more modular pieces instead of all-in-one static medium or canvas like this. Or you've carefully cultivated some inspiration and you're not freaked out. God bless you for that. But to that point of how it feels when you're staring a blank canvas in the face and when you're not quite sure how to begin, I just want to share something that I wish somebody had told me earlier in my career that I've learned through confessing it to other designers of all skill levels and hearing the same thing back. And most of us are trying to play it too cool to admit this, but I think in any really good design or creative process, you can expect at least once to doubt yourself, where you are or what the outcome of this project will be. You can expect to rage quit your computer. That's a phrase I picked up from my coworker at 10 Up, Tammy Hart, in describing when you just get so frustrated, you slam that thing shut and walk away. It's a perfect term. It should actually be like force quit, rage quit, quit. And then you can expect that at one point or another, you will delete everything and start over. And it will be painful for you to do this, and you will struggle with whether you should delete it or not. And if you're questioning it, you probably should. But everyone does this. This is really good. This is part of it. So don't stop. Keep going. So towards the end of last year, I was working on a project. I was supposed to be working on a project for a photography blog. And I had about 2 weeks to do it. And I had burned up 1 week not doing it. And it was one of those weeks that followed on the heels of putting out a bunch of awesome work and then just feeling done, feeling empty and spent. And this client and I clicked, so our process was a little informal, and I'll tell you that the creative brief was 2 bullet points: mismatched china and eclectic. So I'm thinking, okay, let me add something really, really insightful here. I want it to look like an anthropology store, and that's what we had. That's all we had to go on. And I had nothing. So like any good freelancer, I went to Target instead of sitting at my computer screen. And why not? There all the time. And so I stumbled upon this aisle. And after searching, finding nothing, this of all places in this aisle in Target is where I found my inspiration. To me, the geometric patterns and the color palette, I just was like, yes, yes. So I promised you anthropology, and I'm giving you Target, but I think it's going to work out. And then because I had done at least an informal process, gathering my plan and doing my inspiration, I then went shopping for themes. And I found, I don't know if you can see that, the contrast doesn't look, but it's the craftiness theme from the Studio Press marketplace. And that's where, I didn't mention this probably in choosing a theme shop, but I develop or design exclusively with Studio Press in my past, so that's where I go pretty much. So I found this theme, and obviously I had like a right brain reaction to it, that it was cute and I liked it. But then my left brain side was like, this accomplishes what a photography blogger needs. It's got a heavy use of featured images. It's going to be simple for her to update. It looks like a blog, not a really, corporate website. And yeah, I think we can work with this. I can keep a couple of the design elements. The base color palette works kind of with what I got. So I came up with this. And kind of the thinking behind this is Charlie, the lovely woman up there in the sidebar. She is one of those girls. I knew this right when I met her. I felt like I had known her forever. And she's one of those people, unlike me, who can actually make it to the post office and send people real letters with real paper and like calligraphy. And she's very personal and warm. And everything she does is very intentional. And she brings that to her clients. And, of course, that's appropriate when she's photographing weddings and newborns. And I wanted a site that represented and expressed that warm nature that she had. I wanted it to be as personalized as she was. And she cried when she saw it, not because she hated it. She loved it. And I've gotten that a few times, and it's just like, I should add that my number one inspiration is usually my clients. If they're passionate about what they're doing and they love it, I can run with that. And that's almost everybody. I think that's a lot of people who come to WordPress. They're passionate about what they're doing. They're open source minded. They're cool. And so because this site had a limited amount of pages, and I knew she wasn't going to need to scale this site much larger than it already was, it's largely a blog and a portfolio site, I used custom body classes to give each page kind of its own feel. I didn't want it to look off the shelf. And because I was being efficient with buying an off-the-shelf theme, I was able to spend more time doing stuff like this. Instead of just changing the hex colors and uploading a new header, I could really make it custom for her. So when I approach a site like this, going back to the blank canvas, it helps me to compartmentalize everything, to break the theme or the task at hand down into pieces. Pieces that I can fix or decorate or somehow change and customize and then put it all back together. Pieces that allow me to break free of one big blank canvas in Photoshop. This is the process that works for me. This is the order in which I proceed when I'm doing it. Color palette, because that's the tone, that's the emotion and the mood of the site. And then typography, because I have to tell you, and it was sad the first moment I realized this, no one's there to see your design when they visit a website. Nobody cares. They might stay longer because of it, but they are there to read things. They are there to get information and get out. If you don't get in the way of that, your design is a success. If you make it a pleasant experience, it is a success. But typography, important. And then I moved through these more standard features of a theme that you would customize. Very simple, but helps to think of it in this way to make it more manageable. And visually, this is how I see what I need to change when I customize a theme. And for this site, these are those pieces. So I've got the color palette, the fonts I used. One of them are my fonts, web fonts, which if you can avoid working with those, do that. And then Google font. And then just kind of putting a bunch of little pieces together to make the eclectic, mismatched China anthropology, but really target site that she so badly wanted. So when you look at a site in this linear format in slides, and I'm telling you about this site and this process after the fact, you might get the impression that it was smooth sailing. Click, 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 I'm done. I had a week, woo! But actually it really sucked at a couple points. I thought, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. I hit the wall. We've all hit the wall. Unless you haven't, raise your hand because I would like to talk to you. Okay, so the best thing you can do is take a break. And I know if you're like me and every designer I've ever met, you do your best work, you do your most work when you're under the gun and you have no time at all. That's all of us, right? The 11th hour is the best time to do work. But you always have a minute. You always have 5 minutes. You always have a chance to walk away and refresh. And if you don't take the 5 minutes now, you're probably going to come in like 2 hours late because you're just going to waste time sitting there, wondering why. Looking out, this day I was doing this, I was looking out the window being like, that damn mailman, all he has to do is put these letters in there and I'm stuck up here slaving away at this site. Like, I want that. I want to do that. That's not good. Walk away. And then I would suggest you play. You are a creative person. You have a lot of creative energy. And sometimes when you use that for other people, it gets drained. Sometimes when you're creating on somebody's agenda, in somebody's constraints, you run out. You hit that wall. So what you do is you walk away and you don't tell your boss exactly in these terms, but you say, I'm going to go play. But what that can mean is just make something with your hands, if you can, and it doesn't have to be good. The objective, for once, is not for it to be pretty, for nobody to evaluate it, for nobody to use it. It's just for you to exercise the muscle. Creativity is a muscle, and you have to stretch it, or you're going to pull it. I don't know. But you have to stretch the creative muscle. What I do, if you want an example, is I'll get out India ink or watercolors, and I know how that sounds, but it really does something. It really unblocks something, and it reminds you, like, I like to create stuff. This can be fun. I'm doing what I love. How awesome is that? And then, in a more practical sense, go back to your inspiration. If you find that you've cycled through all of that and it's really not inspiring you anymore, get more. Go shopping for more inspiration and take where you're going to the next level. You won't start from scratch. You'll find stuff that's in the same vein as what you were looking at before, and you'll see something that's like, yes, 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 that's another thing I can add. That's another thing I can do. And I'm really sorry to tell you this, but you have to learn to code, because inspiration and planning and design technique will take you so far. But when you're designing for the web and you're not at least a little familiar with code, you're not at least able to look at a CSS file and find out how your PSD translates to that, you're selling yourself short and you're cheating yourself. Because when you learn to code, and you don't have to sit down and do it and get a certification, you just have to work a little bit at it each time and make an effort and not act like it's not part of your job. But when you do that, you'll get more creative control over your designs. That's good. You might actually be able to link to a live site in your portfolio instead of showing a screenshot of the PSD. You know that, right? Like you think, this looks awesome, and then you see it and you're like, this is not awesome. And you messed it up. But they didn't mess it up. You gave them something that could be messed up. Also, your developers will like you better, and that is good. You want your developers to like you. You don't want them to be, God, this idiot. You can't change this. You can't do this. This has no rhyme or reason. This is just, what are you doing? Like, I've had to learn to code. And I wouldn't say that I know how to code. I say I'm learning how to code, and I consider it my responsibility as a designer. And if you don't do this, somebody who does will take your job almost every time, because that's where this is going. So now that I've given you that lecture, I would like to share some resources with you where you can maybe learn how to do some of those things. And also just, this is a very limited, non-exhaustive sampling of some of the tools and resources that I use. The coding is on the next one, actually. But so in the spirit of customizing things that are off the shelf, assuming that we're doing this because we want to be more efficient, we want to work in a fixed price on a limited budget and get more and more out of it, I think I have a couple of feelings about using custom graphics because there are so many cool ones out there. Like when I started, it was like iStock, and I'm thinking, why pay for this if I can just copy and paste the Word clip art? This stuff is horrible. But now the stuff out there is just so cool. And it's a slippery slope. The first thing I would say is never misrepresent yourself. Never use something you don't have the rights to use. And by all means, if you're a designer selling your services as a designer, take a minute to customize the things that you're building. I will say at a high level, I believe that your design is not just the things you create with your hands. It's your eye, your sense of what looks right. You're not selling them graphics. You're selling them a solution. You're selling them your composition of all of these elements that you either created from hand or that you bought for $5. And at the end of the day, if you're on a fixed price project with a budget and you can spend $5, touch up a graphic and be done in 5 minutes versus slaving on it and making something custom and being a hero for 20 hours, that's a no-brainer. But if a client comes to you and says, I've got all this budget and all this time, make them a custom font for their logo. Do more custom things. Know the client and have multiple approaches. And take the one that makes sense. That's what we're doing here. We're running a business. We're making money. We're going to take the one that makes sense. So here are some tools. The one I really love, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but the Color Hail Pixel, that is such a cool tool. And then I think these are all pretty standard for typography. Textures, most people know about subtle patterns, but Lost and Taken, I don't know if anybody knows about that, but that's an awesome site for textures. And Flickr, as long as you're keeping track of who's actually cool with you using their photos for things. Some other little tools I use in my workday. Really great resources for learning code, especially Don't Fear the Internet. If you guys don't know about that, Jessica Hish's project to make designers more familiar with HTML and CSS. It's really cool for a designer because it's very visual, it's cool, and it's not exhausting to somebody who doesn't really want to be there in the first place. It's more fun. And it's a series, so that's cool. Design Hack is something I recently signed up for that delivers design lessons to your inbox. I think it's weekly or bi-weekly, but it's cool. Some organization, little things to do by Swiss Miss Designer. That one's a very design-friendly to-do list. And again, the reason I put those up there is because we're talking about designing in a very intentional way, working through checklists, going through processes, so it can be helpful to write down the things you need to do instead of keep them in your head and make your head explode. Inspiration sources, I think everybody knows, to go Dribbble or Pinterest. I actually can't go on Pinterest for home decorating or cream cheese croissant things. I have to go on only for design because it's so overwhelming to me. But there's a great repository now of graphic design resources for different posters and textures. It's really useful. And now, of course, more people are using it for their portfolios. So, and real life. Real life is a really great form of inspiration. I like real life. So, do you guys like real life? Real life is good. Okay. So if I could sum up what my commandments to myself are at this point in my career after refining my creative process and my strategy over the year, I would say to myself in my lonely little office every day, work smarter. Don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. Definitely don't reinvent the wheel if you're not getting paid to. And don't reinvent the wheel if instead you could bank that extra time being more creative or padding your bottom line. Have a plan. You know the saying that it's like, if you don't have the time to do it right now, when will you have time to fix it later? You need to have a plan because plans protect you, let's be honest, from your client, but they protect you from yourself too. And then stick to the plan. It does you zero good if you don't stick to it. That's pretty obvious. And keep going. This one is the most important point for me because a lot of designers stop when they get challenged. And you keep going because if you keep things moving, and I mean literally moving, like move things around on the page, keep going. If you keep moving, that's how things fall into place. A great idea, a brilliant concept can hit you just as hard, just as unexpectedly as that wall. So keep going because you really don't know what's about to happen. And 9 times out of 10, I would say 10 times out of 10, right after the freak out and the moment of panic comes the breakthrough. So keep going. And be fearless. So many of us starting out, and especially so many of us designers, are afraid to break things. But that's the best way to learn things. I mean, break things safely. Don't break things cowboy coding on your live site. But break things in a safe place because putting them back together is critical for you learning to understand how they're made. Andrea Rennick, she's such a cool person. You should follow her on Twitter and in her life if you don't already. I think she's Andrea R. Anyway, because really at the end of the day, if you're doing your job, you have to stop and realize, Mike Montero, another book, Design is a Job, amazing. This is the best job in the world. We get to do what we love. We get to create things for other people. We get to make other people's dreams come true. We get to make other people's businesses a success. We get to make other people's visions something they can actually see and touch in real life. And we get to have so much impact. Designers can really change the world with developers. Love developers. But this is the best job in the world. So let's do it right. And you can find my slides here and follow me on Twitter there.